So unless anyone else wants to say something, let's go right to the roll call, please.
McAllister,
Here.
Flynn,
Here.
Walter,
Here.
Spence,
Here.
Henschel,
I'm here.
Nelson,
Here.
Andrews,
Here.
Morris,
Here.
Seifert.
Here. First public comment. Mr. Goodman?
Any person shall be permitted to address a meeting of the Board of Commissioners, which is required to be open to the public under the provisions of the Michigan Open Meetings Act. Public comment shall be carried out in accordance with the following board rules and procedures. Any person wishing to address the board may state his or her name, township or district, providing a specific address is not recommended. Persons may address the board on matters or issues which are relevant and germane to county government as determined by the chair. No person shall be allowed to speak more than once on the same matter, excluding time needed to answer commissioners' questions, if any. The chair shall control the amount of time each person shall be allowed to speak, which shall not exceed 3 minutes. The chair may, at his or her discretion, allow an additional opportunity or time to speak if determined germane and necessary to the discussion. Public comment will be solicited during the 2 public comment periods noted in Rule 5.4 Order of Business. However, public comment may be received during the meeting when a specific agenda topic scheduled for discussion by the board. Prior to the first public comment, the chair will indicate the topics on the agenda for which public comment will be accepted. Members of the public wishing to comment should raise their hand or pass a note to the clerk in order to be recognized and shall not address the board until called upon by the chair. The board shall not comment or respond to a person who is addressing the board. Silence or non-response from the board should not be interpreted as disinterest or disengagement by the board. Please be respectful and refrain from personal or political attacks.
Bruce, you want to say anything? I don't see any other hands. Let's move on. Let's go to the approval of the agenda. Take a motion.
I'll actually propose that we add an item C for discussion, which is since our last meeting and before our next meeting, just the agenda item would be a beta update.
Do we have a beta update?
We had a discussion with a judge on Thursday after our last meeting, and I was just going to give an update on that.
I second the motion.
To the board.
All right, motion by Andrews and seconded by Commissioner Henschel. I suppose that's a roll call,
That's
isn't it?
to add item C beta to the agenda.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. So I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Andrews, second by Flynn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So, discussion 5A, Ethics Code Policy Update.
Sorry, I'm trying to get something.
Matt ran out of the room already.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Barely.
We can hear you, kind of. Can't see you.
My camera's on.
Yeah, it's not
We
you,
seem
I
to
don't
have
think.
a technical glitch.
It's on our end.
One moment, please. Excuse me.
There he is.
Hey.
Got you now, Matt. How's the volume now? Can you test it, please?
Can you hear me okay?
No.
It's pretty
Not really.
light.
Testing, testing. My microphone is on.
We're working on it. Keep talking.
It's probably gonna work.
I'll say something. You'll
Okay.
Got
How's
it?
the weather up there today?
Nice. We can hear you now.
Beautiful.
Okay. All right. Chair, should I just give a little overview of what this new document is in front of you?
Please do.
All right, so after the feedback from the last meeting, took a look at some other policies, some of the concerns I tried to address here. It really became the point where this was enough new material that a red line was pretty much incomprehensible. So I would consider this more of a wholesale redraft of a code of ethics for your consideration. The objectives here were to have a uniform policy that covered county commissioners, elected officials, appointees of the board, and employees. So the guidelines and the definitions are consistent amongst all groups to the extent that the Board of Commissioners has direct oversight or control. I also went through and revised the procedures for reporting an investigation and tried to make it clear that all initial complaints will be reviewed administratively and then determined a determination of credibility and or referral will be made at that point in time. To the extent it does not involve a county commissioner, a countywide elected official, or an appointee of the board, those complaints would stay with administration to resolve. And I anticipate that my office would be involved to the extent necessary or outside counsel, depending on the nature of the complaint, and those would be handled internally. If there are complaints that are found credible regarding a county commissioner, elected official, or appointee of the board, those would be referred to an ethics panel. And I put together a procedure for the appointment of an ethics panel. Nate, not to pick on you, but in the event there was a complaint involving the administrator, that would also go to an ethics panel. Obviously, we wouldn't want administration investigating itself. So the other part of the policy that I think is really critical here is enforcement. And there are certain limitations depending on the category of individual, whether or not it's an elected official, a commissioner, or an employee. And so what I'm trying to make clear here is what can be done as it relates to the status of the individual and the ethics policy. And so hopefully this provides a more uniform and clear set of expectations. I think the main point of the policy is to set forth the guidelines, and also the policy is intended to encourage disclosure as it relates to anyone who could have a potential conflict of interest, even if it is not a legally prohibited conflict of interest. What I've found in my experience is that these policies work best when people err on the side of disclosure. And so that would mean even if somebody coming to you, let's say, not to pick on Cliff, but the IT department came forward with a recommendation regarding 3 contracts, and there was a personal relationship with one of the vendors. Even if it was not a legally prohibited conflict of interest, that relationship should be disclosed to the board, and that's what this policy would set forth.
Thank you. Any questions for Matt on that? Or discussion?
I just have one clarifying question. Thank you, Matt. It looks clear, and it seems like this is an improvement. Each iteration has, in my mind, gotten a little clearer and a little better, so I appreciate that. The one question I have in the memo, this goes to when a complaint comes forward, when does it go to the ethics panel? And so I'm looking in particular at page 6 of 8 of the packet, IV reporting process. In the way it's written in the policy, the complaint starts, it goes to HR or administration. If they think there is a potential conflict, then they send it on to ethics panel.
If it involves a commissioner, a countywide elected official, or an appointee of the board.
So that's, I guess that's my point. Your memo made it sound like if the complaint involves conduct that is beyond the scope of authority for either the administrator or HR director, then they move it to an ethics panel. But the language says if there's a potential conflict for an internal investigation, then it moves forward. At least that's how I'm reading it.
Yes, that would be another category. And that's the example I gave if it involved the administrator.
I guess my concern is that the way it's written, I think it doesn't cover the first scenario. I think it meant to, but I don't see it in there. Maybe you can clarify. It looks to me like, I'm just going through the reporting process paragraph.
Maybe I should
Sorry. It's
reiterate
IV,
in the reporting process. If you look at the next section down, A,
Yeah. Wait, the next
talks about
section down.
administrative investigations,
Yep.
and then it says, in the event the investigation results in a finding of a policy violation of the Code of Ethics by a county commissioner, countywide elected official, or an appointee of the board, this information will be submitted to the Board of Commissioners for review and consideration. And I could include that type of language in the reporting process so it's clear that that goes to the ethics panel.
Yeah, I guess that's a question. Do we want HR or admin doing that first level investigation? Or is the idea that as soon as the investigation comes in, assuming it's got, it smells credible, right? By that I mean a smell test, right? Just not obviously made up enough to move forward. Is there an investigation or does it immediately go to the panel?
My
What do you
understanding
think?
from the feedback at the last meeting was that there was a desire to have the matter reviewed by administration before it was passed on to the board.
Yeah, that was my thought too, that most things probably would just go through HR and administration, and then they would see if it needed to be elevated, unless it involves them, of course.
So I guess, this is kind of a fine point. Does HR and admin investigate allegations involving, say, the Register of Deeds, just to use a different non-personal elected official or the prosecutor or whatever, and then bring it to the board, or do they immediately send it to the board?
I've designed this so that they would make initial determination whether or not it's a credible allegation for consideration by an ethics panel.
Okay.
Based on the facts of an ethics complaint, we may be able to review that information internally and resolve it.
So the concept is sort of there's a threshold credibility evaluation internally, unless it involves one of those entities that would be making that threshold determination. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a concern, and maybe, and maybe you can speak to how this would work, Matt, or maybe administration, if you have thoughts on this, so let's say there is a complaint about, to use your examples, an elected official, register of deeds, or prosecutor or something, and it gets sent to administration and/or HR, I'm assuming it's a combination, and they, for whatever reason, decide that they don't want to bring it to us, or do we see the things that were brought to them that were deemed not credible? I'm just wondering if there's an interest in having what's the word,
Disclosure?
A notification process?
a notification and then an appeal process, right? If somebody's like, well, no, this is, what if it does involve them or another elected official? I'm just wondering if that's somehow baked into this that I'm not understanding.
Are you maybe thinking about some type of an official log of complaints with a outcome?
I think you're saying, I disagree that you found there's nothing there. What do I do in that case? Is it dead as soon as, say, Donna decides, nope, it's dead? Is that it? Or is there a process where somebody who thinks that somebody's been, the IT department, right? I'm just making this up. This is totally hypothetical. Someone in the IT department has a relationship with someone who's getting a $500,000 contract. HR is like, nope, it's fine, nothing to see here. Does the person who flagged the whistleblower have a recourse beyond that?
An appeal process or something.
The only thing I can think of at this moment would be some type of provision that in the event that the complaint was determined to be unfounded or not legitimate, they could appeal to the chair of the board.
Commissioner Nelson, before I speak, go ahead.
So thanks for cleaning this up. I think the changes you made are significantly better, so thank you very much. On section 3F under gift, and I'm sorry I didn't think of this ahead of time, or I would have sent you an email. Often we will attend an event that offers food and drink or something like that, and it's a part of, everyone there is getting it. We're getting a meal, might be at a nicer place, so it would be a more, meals are getting quite expensive now. Is that where we would address that? Is there a way, how would you cover that?
Guidelines.
So I get into gifts a little bit. under the guidelines. If you look at the guidelines at number 2C,
2C.
C4
and
for food.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
on page 1. And the guidelines, and this would apply to everyone, are not to solicit or accept a gift of loan or money, goods or services, benefits, privilege, favors, or any other thing of value which tends to influence the way the official duties are performed, excepting the following. Opportunities and benefits that are available in the same conditions as the general public, any contribution lawfully made under the campaign finance laws, anything provided on an individual, by an individual based on a personal friendship. And then 4 is the food or refreshments not exceeding $100 per person in value on a single calendar day. So I'm trying to account for that there and indicate that that would not be prohibited, not an ethics violation, because I'm certainly well aware of those examples, Commissioner, and thought of that. And I do think that's something that should be clear would not violate the ethics policy to have a meal provided.
Okay, thank you.
As long as that meal doesn't exceed $100, which one could contemplate easily occurring.
I was in
the price of
DC,
things.
when
I
I was
know,
in
I'm
the NACO DC conference, breakfast at the hotel, and there was really nothing for a mile away. Breakfast was $45. And that I mean, no one was providing that for me, but you getting $100 is not, especially you go to an event, a lot of events now are, it's $175 for the
But-
ticket.
Well, I
which-
think
But
the
if it's
point is,
number 1 covers the,
yeah, that it's,
it's the same as what's offered to the public.
to
I think $100
influence
is a
the,
little
I mean, the
low.
whole thing is
Yeah.
to influence the way
Yeah.
duties are performed, not just, obviously, those are all.
I concur, but I think the dollar amount should probably be a little higher.
Yeah.
$100 is
Okay.
not all that. Like, I think probably around $200 is probably more appropriate. Commissioner Spence?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Matt. When you were reviewing this code that you've polished up a little more, you were kind of giving the easy case scenario where HR can review it, maybe give a determination that it's not going to be a big deal and they can handle it in-house. But I guess I was looking at this through the lens of like worst case scenario where it needs to go to an ethics board, which in your note you said that it would contain 3 people, some of which might be county commissioners. I guess I'm curious and I'm concerned about there being bias if it goes to an ethics committee that consists of county commissioners. I looked at a couple things. I looked at Michigan Association of Counties and the National Association of Counties. I looked at Ingham County, and I looked at Broward County, Florida, and I can explain why I looked at Broward County, Florida, if you want to know, but they all suggest that a board of ethics would be an appointed board, so there wouldn't be bias. And I wondered if, after reading your letter that you sent to us, why we wouldn't just appoint a ethics board instead of having one that consists of some of our county commissioners and people in-house.
Interesting thought.
That's certainly an option. My only concern with that is that anyone you pick, unless they're outside of the organization, could potentially be implicated. So I just wanted to account for the possible fact pattern where, let's say we picked 2 elected officials and the county administrator. It's possible that one of those 3 people could have a conflict. We can go through in the policy and talk about if that happened, having alternates or substitutes. The way that I've designed this was just based on what I thought would be practical, which is that the chair of the board, or if the complaint involves the chair, the vice chair would appoint a chairperson and 2 additional members. I could make it clear that those, and I think I did actually, the members of the ethics panel may be a member of the Board of Commissioners, an employee of the county, or any other suitable person subject to the Code of Ethics. So it's a pretty broad opportunity to bring in outside perspectives to the ethics panel. But if you wanted more detail or even to establish, oh, I lost video there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Or if you wanted to establish a more confined set of criteria for the ethics panel, that's really your discretion. So I'm happy to adjust that as the board sees fit.
Yeah, that's where I personally am leaning, like, let's just appoint people to the ethics board, and if someone does have a conflict, then they could be substituted, or somebody else could be appointed to serve on their behalf. Because otherwise, it feels kind of arbitrary, in my opinion. It's like, well, we can use people within the organization, but we can also choose to go outside of it.
So are you going down the road of having like a standing appointed board where we have, 5 people, for example, from the public who are appointed for that year or 2 years or something?
Yeah, based on what they bring to the table and what their skill set is. I'm just using this based upon what I got from Ingham County's ethics, their code of ethics, and also the National Association of Counties and Broward County. And I bring up Broward County because I recently learned about some egregious ethics violations in their county. I met somebody from there, and so I was digging through, and an AICP, the guy who's in charge of Florida's planning committee, he is from Broward County, so I thought that was interesting.
I like that idea. It seems it could be less.
I don't, and this is why, because those people that you're gonna pick at the beginning of the year to last for the year may be involved in that. We have to start the whole process over again.
Everybody from the public you think would be involved?
No, if we're gonna pick 5 people today to be the ethics panel for the whole year, if that's what you're suggesting, one of those people might be involved. I think we should be looking for people when the incident happens. I'll get to you in a minute, Commissioner Nelson. The other thing that I don't like about this is that, and I'm gonna use myself and Nate as an example, this is hypothetical, of course. Say I do something inappropriate, Nate knows about it, but he determines, well, I'm not gonna call the board chair on it. Of course you would do that, but say he doesn't do that. So how is the rest of you gonna find that I did something that's inappropriate? First off. Second of all, and everybody's all about, hey, you're guilty. Well, what happens if they're not guilty? What happens if somebody says, hey, we think it's a violation and it's out of context? And it's like there should be an appellate process to say, I don't think it was out of context. Inappropriate, maybe, but does that mean that because I called somebody out on being a criminal, that makes me, I'm not a valued member of society? I disagree. Beta, let's use Beta as an example.
I think you
There's
need to
been-
speak into your microphone.
They can hear me,
I'm
but
not
thank
really
you.
following. I'm not really following.
Beta is an example. So the way that this county has been treated by other county appointees is deplorable. But they may not say that they might feel that it's okay considering the things that has ended up in a lawsuit. So as we're going down the road, there needs to be checks and balances, not only for the scenario I suggested, but also for people that may be innocent, that in the heat of the moment get declared censured or proven guilty or things like that. There needs to be an appellate process and a second notification. We need to be notified no matter who determines what. Whether it comes to us or not, if it's an elected official or it's a department head, there needs to be a notification process, even if it's closed session, saying, hey, this is what's going on.
We don't
We're
get
pursuing it.
We don't get notified now if there's an ethics violation from somebody in staff, and nor do I want to be flooded
I didn't say staff, I said elected
You
officials.
said department head.
Department head, they work for us.
No, they don't. They don't report to us, just like any other staff member. They report to Nate. They don't report to
Who
you.
works for us.
So I'm hearing
Where do you think tax dollars come from?
three things being discussed. One is the standing versus an ad hoc sort of panel. One is a appellate process for somebody who's accused and found to have been in violation of the ethics policy. And a third is a notice to a person who is subject to an ethics complaint that are on the table. 3 ideas. And I think, personally, I don't have a problem with an ad hoc appointment on an ethics panel. I don't have a strong opinion about it. I think this is going to be a rare thing. I think to get citizens, random citizens appointed to an ethics panel that may very likely never, ever meet, and then have them spend time learning, that doesn't feel efficient to me. But I also acknowledge, right, whatever we do, if we don't like it, if we ever use it, we can change it.
We have other boards that don't meet. Some of us serve on.
No, that's true. I don't have a strong feeling about standing versus appointed. I just think this is something in front of us, and I don't object to it as written, but.
Commissioner Nelson's trying to say something.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Nelson, please.
So, going back to where we were talking about the standing committee, I like the idea of that this board, the chair, the vice chair could appoint either citizens, member of the board, member of the staff. I don't think it should be a standing committee that's in place ahead of time. I think it would be a good idea that depending on how the possible ethics violation occurs, there's maybe the need for citizens, maybe the need for staff, maybe the needs for Board of Commissioners. I think that could be decided at the time. So I like the idea that we don't want to tie our hands and say who can and can't be on that ethics committee, but I think the chair can appoint at that time based on the situation. So I don't believe we need a standing. I think we should, but not tie our hands and say who we can and can't put on it at this point.
I would offer a potential compromise at that, like we do for all the other appointees that we make. We could ask for applications of people who are interested, so we already have a file for that year. Every year we ask for applications, and then if we need to do it, we'll have a group of folks that we can pick on and say, hey,
Pick on? You don't mean
sorry,
pick from.
accept and appoint, my bad. To do that, I think it's a happy medium. I don't want, again, I mean, Commissioner Nelson makes a valid point. It's like, now we have you, we haven't done anything for 6 months, now we got to retrain you, whatever, what have you. Commissioner Henschel.
We have a fairly diverse county. You know, we've got people that live in, you know, south area where it's you know, less densely populated. We have a northern area with the city where it's more densely populated. A lot of different views, microcosms of culture. We could have an ethics committee where we set up something like districts throughout the county, maybe get about 9 people, and have the electorate actually vote for people from each district that would represent their interests, and that could be the ethics committee. And if anyone is a subject of that ethics committee, they would automatically be recused from participation, and the remaining 7, 8 people could then you know, discuss what would be best from there.
You're proposing that this body just take that role. I don't think that has worked historically, and I would...
Can you give an example? When did it not work?
First of all, we have no investigative process.
Okay. Well,
It's
we
a dog
actually
and
have
pony
an
show,
ethics
and
committee.
it's an expense when we're trying not to spend more money than what we already are.
Can
Somebody else had their hand up.
can I
Mr.
just finish?
McAllister.
I'll just-
Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies.
That's all right. And just anyone in the public watching, listening, go on your favorite search engine and type in Grand Traverse County Employee Ethics Policy or Code of Ethics Policy. You'll bring it up, and it says right in there that this applies to elected officials, and there is a process in there already. It doesn't have an ethics committee, but this is the policy from a couple decades ago that was updated in July of 2019 after we had a committee meet. It was Representative Coffia and I believe former county commissioners Jewett and Klaus. They got together, they looked at it. They voted by majority that the policy needed a couple changes, but it is sufficient at that time. And the board did update the policy so that it does affect elected officials at that time. I know the Record Eagle recently reported on this event, and they left out the part where the County Board of Commissioners updated the policy and acknowledged that the policy was sufficient, that it did cover all elected officials, including county commissioners. They just reported that we dissolved the committee and nothing happened. Now what happened? We did update it. We do have a policy. So my question right now is, when we look at this new proposed policy, what is it we really want to accomplish that is not accomplished by the old policy, or the current policy, I should say, and what do we want to accomplish? And does this accomplish that? And do we all agree that's what should happen? Because we do have a policy in place. There is a procedure. And I don't know if that was reviewed by Mr. Nordford when he drafted this. And I guess I'd like to see a compare and contrast of what's currently in place and what we're trying to put in place.
He provided red lines in the past, I
Yeah,
think
but-
he's provided now 3 different drafts of the original 2019 version in 2 different study sessions, and then this is a 4th version, which I think he
So-
said.
But what is it we want to accomplish?
And that, what we're probably trying to determine. Commissioner McAllister.
No, I'm good.
Oh, so I'm sorry. Anyone else before I go to Commissioner Walter? Because you spoke a couple times. So go ahead, Commissioner Walter.
Thanks. I guess to Commissioner Henschel's questions, we talked about those in a couple other meetings, so I don't know if you were there or missed the conversation about kind of where why we're here today, and we've already gone through multiple iterations that are based on the current policy. I think the issue with the current policy is that there really is no enforceability of the policy on the board. And some of us felt that there should be some teeth put into the policy, and that's why, and that we are accountable to each other, and that's why we need to update it, because it says that, we're kind of lumped in, we elected officials are lumped in with staff saying we could be, removed from our positions, but that's not true, right? So there's
Right.
some parts of the policy that, it looks like we were just sort of thrown in there. I don't know who updated it in 2019, but it doesn't apply to us in the current policy. That's why we're looking at how can we tweak it to make it more equitable, but also more accountable for us.
I've not seen anything produced yet, other than this board could vote to censure, which is a purely appearances, you'll get your name in the headlines, but it doesn't do anything for the person's ability to perform their duties as a county
Well,
commissioner.
This policy would take the situation, and to Commissioner Walters' point, it's not just that, it doesn't apply to county commissioners, it doesn't apply to any elected official, and there are many in our county, beyond the 9 of us, right? The sheriff, and we approve all their budgets. Every time they spend money, they come to us and ask us to approve it. If in the process of spending money, it turns out there's some ethics, there's some nepotism, there's some personal gain, somebody's wife is getting in on a contract, we have an obligation to the people whose money we are approving the spending of to investigate that. And the censure is not the only recourse, as we talked about last time, invalidating the contract, rebidding the contract, looking at policies to avoid that. Maybe changing the threshold for bidding, maybe ensuring that our definitions of who's a personal interest is clear. And there's lots of things short of saying, Sheriff, we're censuring you, to address a situation where, there's a new jail getting built, and it turns out every night for the last 2 months, somebody's been taking the sheriff to dinner for $500 a night. Right? I don't know, I'm making it up. But you could imagine a situation where it would come up, and we have an obligation to have more than just, you're elected, I guess we don't get it. I think that's, to my mind, that's the process. I just want to, standing committee versus ad hoc, I don't have strong feelings against appellate process. I'm fair with that. I think we should clarify, and I think our attorney can easily, if it's not already there, say, you're entitled to all your due process rights, both of notice and of appeal. Because I don't think, if there is a harm to somebody, financially or otherwise, you should have all your rights. Those seem to me edits that can be easily incorporated of the 3 things that were being discussed. Sorry.
You're right, Commissioner Nelson.
So I've got the current, the 2019 version up from the website. I just emailed it to all of you, but I want to make it a factual correction here. It says Grand Traverse County maintains certain policies to guide its employees and appointed and elected officials.
Yeah.
So the very first sentence, it does include employees
Right.
appointed and elected.
But it's
doesn't-
it's section 8, enforcement. Any employee or appointed official who violates the provisions of this code shall be subject to disciplinary action. That's the problem.
This is what
It's
Matt's been
section
redlining
8.
for us.
I know, I get that.
So
But
yes,
I-
it applies up until the fact that we can't do anything about it.
Right now.
Well,
That's
we're,
why.
we're limited legally on what, we cannot remove one another.
Right, but nobody's
cannot-
proposing we do that.
Well,
Well,
and
but
I'm sorry.
There's a
go ahead.
reason that political groups are not allowed to, a lot of sanctions and everything. We don't work for one another, we work for elected. So I'm not disagreeing with what we've done so far, but it's factually incorrect to say that it doesn't apply to elected officials now.
It applies, there's no enforcement
So-
provision.
So currently, right now, myself and 2 other commissioners could call a special meeting to censure any commissioner on this board. That censure will include, despite what some people will say, to removal from appointees to any board if we decide their behavior is inappropriate, including the airport, including Beta, whatever, authority. They don't, because they represent us in the committee. That's pretty much it. So,
Yes.
and granted, I understand it, it's about being public and about being honest and sharing it with our voting public and our taxpayers, and I'm all for that. In the example that you gave with the sheriff, The sheriff does that, there's a reason why we control his budget. Because if that's what he does, we will strangle him financially. If you can get the amount of the board, the people on the board to vote for that. It's politics. And yes, sometimes it just doesn't seem like it's fair. I appreciate where we're heading with this, to make it clear and what have you, but we need to be honest with the public that Commissioner Andrews doesn't get to remove me from my seat because I do something that she doesn't like. That may even be a violation of the law, short of a felony. And
No,
even
that's-
then, I
that's
don't, no, I'm not done. You don't see governors removing people from boards, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and it creates a political quagmire, and that's not what we're here for.
We're not talking about criminal, so you mentioned that, and that's beyond this. If it's a.
Is
It's
it?
a criminal, yes. because
Not at
it's a
all.
whole
I'm gonna
separate
censor, I'm gonna
zone.
censor somebody because they're a commissioner and they've been convicted of a crime.
This is an
Well,
ethics
that's fine,
policy.
but that's
Well,
different than.
no, it's not. It's the same.
The criminal system, the justice system is there outside of this to handle that. Censoring because.
I was convicted of a crime. I could not be removed from office.
Until the governor, only the governor can remove elected officials. We can't do that. But nobody, but that's a straw man argument, right? That's setting
all
up
a
an
straw man
argument
argument.
that says, well, we can't do this one thing, therefore we should do nothing.
That's not what I said
That
at
is,
all.
that is what I'm hearing. We can't remove elected officials from office, so therefore we should not have a process for reporting, investigating, and evaluating allegations of ethics violations.
That's not what anyone's saying.
We already
What I
have,
said was, the law already allows for that.
in our policy,
And
already
it's
have
like,
that.
No, it doesn't.
It
No,
does.
For criminal activity, not for ethics
No,
violations.
even for ethics violations, we can have, I just said it right there. I just explained you how to do it.
Hang on a
Commissioner
second.
Spence.
So I looked up enforcement based upon the 2019 ethics, Code of Ethics, and I'm not satisfied with that. I'd like to look at all the alternatives. I'm the kind of person who looks at every alternative before me and then makes my decision. And something that we haven't talked about between the two things that we've talked about is mediation. I mean, maybe everybody else has a solution for enforcement, but I think that this is vague and it's arbitrary and it needs to be cleared up. And I think that mediation is also something that we should consider when we're enforcing someone who's violated our code of ethics.
Item 4C says one of the outcomes is to mediate or seek a resolution of the disagreement between the writer of the complaint and the person that named it. That's in the proposed new policy that's in front of us. That is an outcome that our attorney has contemplated and articulated in this policy. And that seems like a good way forward in some of these situations.
Yeah, but, and thank you for clarifying that, but I think there's been some insinuations that this old policy is fine the way it's written, so,
Correct.
and that it was okay and satisfactory as is, and why should we change it? And I think that that's good, like, that's something we need really clear guidelines for how to enforce. Enforcement that says, subject to disciplinary action up to and including discharge isn't clear to me. So I'm really happy the way that this is going, and I think mediation is something that's really important, and I'm glad it's in there. Thank you.
All right, so, obviously, we're not taking any action today.
Can I ask our
I have-
attorney? I'm
I've been
sorry.
waiting to.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Commissioner Walters.
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you for
Excuse me.
pointing that out, because I think the mediation is a good change too. I just want to go back to the thing about an standing panel versus an appointed one at the time of something where somebody wants to explore something. And I think that having a standing panel is actually more unbiased and more less political than in the heat of a possible ethics violation, we as a board or the chair decides who's going to be on that panel. I feel like establishing a panel, at the beginning of the cycle or whenever, that is, that we appoint, that's sort of a cross array of people and ideas, is better than in the heat of the idea that comes forward that we want to somehow have investigated. I feel like there's more potential for bias and political considerations at that point.
Thank you.
Can I, sorry, Commissioner Nelson.
Go ahead, Commissioner Nelson.
I have a question for the attorney, if I may.
Absolutely.
So regarding mediation, say the District 10 commissioner is, maybe the other 9 all agree that he, or believe that he has done something wrong and wants to do a mediation, does the District 10 commissioner, does he have to go to mediation? What if the District 10 commissioner says, I've done nothing wrong, I refuse to go to mediation, you can strip me of all of my committees, but I'm not gonna come to mediation? We can't compel them to seek a resolution or mediate, can we?
That's correct. So these are options that the ethics panel may recommend the board take. Again, your point is spot on. It's going to depend on who the person is, and if mediation is generally a voluntary process. We can't order each other to mediate. It would be offered if that's part of the recommendation, and then somebody could participate or not.
Could I make a proposal?
Go ahead.
It seems to me that it would be, Matt, can you add a section about affirmative notice to a person against whom a complaint is asserted? I don't, just, especially if it is going to an ethics panel, it seems like somebody, whoever is the subject of the allegation should get notice of that. Is that something that we can add in?
Yes, I'll
agree
just
with that.
recapture what I understand, and I don't know if there's consensus here, but you could tell me after I state this, is that there's a desire for a notice process, an appeal process, and that we make sure that if there's, I'm still not exactly clear on the consensus towards a standing ethics panel versus an appointed, but that we include the opportunity for a citizen, maybe even plural, to participate in the ethics panel process. So those are my notes of things to revise in the document.
I don't believe there's consensus on the standing or the committee as needed, but, so probably gonna have to have a vote on it at a later date.
So one way forward would be to maybe give us 2 versions, or give us a version A and a version B, where one is an appointed on an as-needed basis versus a standing committee that's appointed at the beginning of a term or something. And
Beginning of the year.
beginning of the year, whatever, and just put those both in front of us for a regular meeting. And then I would just add to your list, Matt, there was a increasing the threshold for the meal limit from, I think, $100 to $200.
Yes. Apologies. I already made that change in here in my own document. I should have mentioned that.
I think that appeals,
Yeah. Yeah, I think he said that, a notice process and appellate process.
Yep,
Okay.
he did.
The other thing I want to point out is, people keep saying, well, we have a current policy and yada, yada, but it also says in there that we sign it every year, and I've never signed it. I'm not against it, but nobody has ever brought it to us to sign every year. And I don't know what else is out there we're supposed to sign every year, but this has never come to me since I've been here to sign.
I signed it 2 years ago, but I haven't signed it since.
Maybe the
probably.
first, but have you seen it? It says it's an annual thing.
We will be working on.
We just signed for you.
Okay, good. I've DocuSign whatever.
We're
I'm
supposed
happy to sign it. I'm happy to sign it today. I'm just saying, it's out, it's one of those things, it's out there, it says we're gonna do it, and it doesn't get done.
We would love to have that within the MyGTC environment, where at the beginning of the new year, you can log into MyGTC and sign the applicable documents. We are working towards that. We are also working on an employee manual that will be required to have signatures as well.
Great.
Fantastic.
May I ask,
Please.
Matt, you have the mediation option for the ethics panel. Can you include that administratively as well? Occasionally we have the
Good idea.
quintessential sexual harassment complaint where employee to employee or employee to manager, and we're responsible for saying, yes, founded in part, not founded in part, or founded or unfounded. They work together. So it would really, I think it would be helpful if we could have a process, and I don't know that it's appropriate for that specific example, Matt, but to have that mediation alternative that those 2 employees could have a discussion to work through the situation to come to a better conclusion rather than just saying founded, unfounded. Does that stand to reason?
Yes.
Do you see any pitfalls there? I see a couple, but can,
Ultimately, it's just sort of depends on who it is in the organizational structure. We do, as an employer, have a responsibility to investigate and resolve complaints. If somebody doesn't like the outcome of the investigation, just sort of taking our positions, and they can react either through a lawsuit or some other process. I think the way that my experience is with internal investigations is that there's a communication process where at least the person gets a summary of the findings. And if they have questions, they can come back and ask for those. I don't know if you look at the investigative procedure Nate under 5A, I have that administrative investigations will be handled in accordance with applicable law and policy. Yep. And I don't know if that is sufficient from your perspective to include that type of meeting. I don't know if we'd call it a mediation necessarily. That I just don't have a strong feeling on that one way or the other than to say that I think that option exists currently.
okay, that's fair enough.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I had a couple of questions. First, I want to point out one concern, just based on past experience, is the timeliness of dealing with perceived ethics or concerns. A couple of years back, we had a situation at Northern Lakes Community Mental Health where a bare minimum of the board voted by a bare minimum of those present, so basically 5 people out of 16, to appoint a CEO. This board at that time, the members sitting on the Board of Commissioners, saw that as a power move that was not in the best interest. We did end up removing some people from that board. My concern with, and I don't know how this would affect a situation like that, is because it was very timely that we had to take action to stop an injustice. If we had this long process that took months and months with mediation, the Board of Commissioners could not have acted. Our hands would have been tied by procedure, I guess, in that situation. So that is a concern, is the timeliness of doing something when there's a rogue group basically taking control of an entity that, with a budget of $80+ million a year. It's not in the public's best interest. So I think we do need to maintain some level of ability to react to emerging situations. My other question was, is it the intention of the board that if a county commissioner is found to have violated an ethics tenet in our ethics policy, that removal of their committees is something to be considered? And I wanted to ask Mr. Nordford, is that actually an option if someone's, stole a candy bar at the local corner store and they got censured by this board? Could they be removed from their seat on the beta board, for example, for something completely unrelated to their work on that board? Is that legal in our powers?
So some of the removal process would be dependent on the type of board. In your beta situation, that would fall under 4611N. And so that process is more formal when you have these statutory boards. If it was an internal county, let's say we were on a county appointed board to review policies, that would be different and not require 4611N. So it would just depend on the situation there. But under your example, Chair, that would need to go through 4611N. Or sorry, former Chair, Commissioner Henschel.
Yes, sir. Could you just describe that process briefly?
So 4611N is basically a statutory structure for the removal of a board appointee. There's a due process component of it, and there's standards in the law, one of which is misconduct, that there's a hearing, the person has an opportunity to present, and then the board makes the determination whether or not there are grounds for removal.
Okay, and those grounds for removal does it necessitate that those grounds are associated with their work directly with that agency? Or could it be something in a different area of their life completely, and can they be removed because they stole a candy bar?
There's a lot of discretion provided to the board in that situation, Chair. Former Chair, sorry, that's
the
an old
answer is
hat.
yes.
It's gonna die hard.
Hey, you want this sign back?
It was 6 years, I can't
Even-
blame the guy.
Most of my time,
Great
it was
question.
many years, so I apologize.
So the answer is yes. If someone was censured because they were found guilty of stealing a candy bar, they could be removed from pretty much any board at the board's discretion if they followed that process.
Do they even need to
Well,
be
I-
censured before that?
They're
No.
completely separate things, right? Like removal
True.
for misconduct or neglect is the statutory requirement. So in your scenario, a board member did something improper, they voted for something that we don't think is in our interest or whatever, we could initiate the 4611N process. Misconduct, neglect of duty. I don't know whether stealing a candy bar, maybe if they stole a candy bar from the clubhouse,
Yeah.
it is a bad, but if they stole a club from Roy's, it's not, right? Maybe it just depends on the situation. But if they meet that standard, I think we can proceed. And separately, we can decide if there was an ethics and go through the ethics policy. And maybe it's one or the other, maybe it's both. I think having an ethics policy doesn't prevent us, doesn't limit our removal authority at all, to my knowledge. Correct, Matt?
Yes, I would agree with that assessment, that it could be a track that results from an ethics investigation, but it is not required. That's an independent source of authority for the board of 4611N.
But it is completely in the discretion of the board as to whether they think, you
I
know,
mean, with the due process, right? With the rights of due process that come with all appointees to meet the standard for notice, a hearing, an opportunity to appeal, all those same things.
Correct.
Gone. Thanks, Matt. We're going to move on. 5B.
And with the ethics discussion?
We're done with that.
Thanks, Matt.
discussion.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you,
for
Matt.
your.
Okay,
Thanks, Matt.
thanks, everyone.
Do we think, just to wrap that up, that maybe that a version could be on a regular agenda for some action, or does the group think we should study it again?
I think if he brings us back a couple options based on the feedback we gave him today, we might be able
Well,
to
let's see
hammer
what the
this out.
options are first, and then we'll make that determination then. Because another study session won't hurt. This is not something we should go lightly into. We're talking about going in two different directions now with two options. I think we should give it its due diligence.
But you pointed out earlier that you weren't sure if there was consensus on something until we vote, so it might be helpful to actually be in a
That's true.
position to be able to vote on something.
It's true.
So it
And
sounded,
that might happen.
it sounded like he's got a few changes, add an appeals and notice process, we changed the dollar value, bring back, so are we saying that with the changes that we talked about that he has already indicated he's gonna make, that this board would likely approve that, or is that what you're asking, Commissioner Walters?
I'm saying we're not sure if there's consensus, but we won't really know that until we can vote, because
Okay.
I didn't hear from certain people at all today about it, so I'm not even sure.
All right. So I think, Matt, if you can make the changes to the policy that we talked about today and ship it back to me, we can push it to a regular, well, a regular
Well,
meeting?
just send it back to us, and then when we set the agenda, once we get it back, we'll make the determination then.
I'm on the fence. You know, I see, you know, the benefit of like a mediation process included, but at the same time, to Vice Chair Andrew's point, we already have the ability to remove people from the committees without making any changes to anything. So like the teeth are there. We can already use them, and it does say disciplinary action that includes elected officials and Board of Commissioners. So it's kind of already there, but I can see there's still room for improvement.
Well, that goes to my point. Let's see what he comes back with. I mean, that is the agenda setting committee's
I appreciate
job, is
that.
to determine whether we're going to put it on the agenda for vote, or we're going to do a study session and then do a vote. This is something that we should make sure that we get right.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Nate. And everyone for your comments. Let's move on to 5B.
So part of our budget discussion, we started with the staffing model because in the general fund specifically, the staffing model, the staffing plan accounts for about 85%, give or take, of the costs associated with the general fund. Mr. Bott has prepared a fund analysis of all funds, which is the larger governmental funds that we have responsibility to account for as well. Those funds are generally based on a dedicated revenue source or just something that is not subject to the general fund expenditures on a day-to-day basis that administration has involvement with. The finance department does. Finance departments are within these funds on a daily basis. You have in your agenda, I believe, a listing of the funds and description of the funds, what each of those funds do. And Mr. Bott is here to kind of walk through what those funds are and how those funds are accounted for. I just lost my computer.
Good morning, Commissioners. So we weren't sure where to start with this, but the concept of, well, let me back up. So we use fund accounting here to account for the resources and expenditures of the county. And those fund accounting is a little bit different. It's quite a bit different than what you would see in the private sector. The concept of a fund is also something that's the foundation or the premise on which the accounting is based. And then the concept of fund balance, which you can see in the report, that the amounts for 2023 and 2024 are the fund balance amounts in each of the funds that are listed. As Commissioner Andrews, she was looking at the audit report, I believe, the amounts for 2023, you could actually trace those back into our audited financial statement. There is a little bit of a twist for financial reporting purposes. Our budget stabilization and pension stabilization funds, which are separate funds in our accounting system, are rolled back up into the general fund for financial reporting. All of these funds, if you are looking for some homework or some research, there's a uniform accounting manual that the Michigan Department of Treasury puts out that you would be able to find these funds in that manual with a definition of what the fund is used for, what's accounted for in the fund, what the primary revenue sources are, and generally what the purpose is. In your packet is a definition of the funds. Those definitions I prepared for the audit. They're required to be in the audit. They're very succinct. They're not as long or as defined as what you might find in the uniform budget or the accounting manual with the Michigan Department of Treasury. And from time to time, Treasury will add a fund or issue guidance on what a fund is used for. The most recent one for us would be the opioid settlement fund, which you see down in the middle of the page. And you can see in that particular fund, the fund balance is increasing from last year to this year, and it currently has $1.58 million in it. Each fund has, it's a self-balancing set of accounts, so it's going to have a cash balance, hopefully, maybe receivables or other asset items, the other types of expenditures, or the typical account would be an account payable, and then your revenue and expenditure account. So this is just one component of what's in that fund, but it's probably one of the most significant items because that's what you basically operate on. And you can see it's no surprise that the general fund, at least on the first page has, you know, the largest fund balance, because that is, every local unit of government will have at least a general fund. You can see that we have more than just a general fund. And then I have labeled the funds. The governmental funds are required by state law to have a budget that's adopted on an annual basis. And that budget has to be balanced, but it will include those revenue sources that you expect to receive, and then the expenditures that are approved. It's important that we have a fund balance in our funds, because the funds, they continue over time. The fund doesn't just exist for, you know, one fiscal year. And it's primarily, or even more important, in the general fund, when you look at the overall size of the budget, or the fact that our main revenue source in the general fund, which is the taxes that are levied, we don't start collecting that tax until, you know, the 1st of July. So the latter part of the second half of our fiscal year, basically. And then what's really important is the note at the top. We are in the process of closing 2024. About 80% of the funds that are listed in the second column, those are pretty solid numbers. We have closed out a good majority of the funds. We have made the final adjustments. We're not done in the general fund. I expect that fund balance to be higher when we finish making our year-end adjustments. For the most part, all of the expenditures have been recognized and accounted for in the general fund, but we're still working on revenue adjustments. A couple of big adjustments in terms of the revenues that haven't been recorded at this time are the marijuana distribution. We have received that. I believe that came in yesterday. And we also have, you know, the balance of the tax levy that needs to be recorded in the general fund. The decrease is primarily, at this point, in the general fund is because of the amount of fund balance that we use per our fund balance policy and reallocated or transferred to the pension stabilization fund, and then our capital improvements fund, which is the last fund that's listed under the general fund, or the governmental funds category. And you can see the increase in that fund balance from last year to this year. We ended 2023 in the capital improvements fund with a $1.7 million fund balance. We're going to end 2024 with a $4.5 million fund balance in that fund. I've also listed enterprise funds. I did not include the pavilions. That's accounted for as an enterprise fund in our accounting system and in our financial report. And then a number of internal service funds, information technology primarily, but a few other funds that we use for internal cost and services that we provide across all funds. I'm going to stop there because I'm sure you have questions, and I could talk a long time about this and wouldn't make a difference, or you wouldn't remember it. So I would rather direct this to what you want to discuss, or questions you might have.
I've got a question.
Go ahead, please.
So you're saying that you transferred money from the general fund to cover, I had it in here. So you transferred money from the general fund and you put it into two other funds that needed to, I think it was capital improvement was one.
Yes, we have a fund balance policy, and every year after our audit is completed, the county administrator, Mr. Alger, will bring an analysis of that fund balance. And per that policy currently, the amount that's over 30% of our annual operating budget is deemed to be, or has been by policy, an amount that's in excess of what we need to operate in that fund. And it's currently transferred, that excess amount is transferred 50% to the pension stabilization fund, and the other 50% goes to the capital improvement fund. For 2023, based on our audited financial statements, that number was approximately $7 million. It was a little bit higher than that, but $3.5 million in 2024 was budgeted and approved and actually transferred to the Pension Stabilization Fund. You can see the increase in that fund balance. And then the other $3.5 million, the other 50% went to the Capital Improvement Fund.
Okay, it's good to know the rationale behind it. Thank you.
And may I add a little context?
Yeah.
So, Commissioner Spence, that initial policy, well, the policy actually divvies that up in 3 ways. The other fund that was going to be funded by that overage was the Budget Stabilization Fund. The Budget Stabilization Fund policy, though, or the section that relates to that, once that stabilization fund got to 1.25 million, Dean?
Correct.
Then we stopped contributing to that fund, and we are at 1.25 million in that fund currently. So once that Budget Stabilization Fund dips below 1.25 million, the policy would actually direct 25% to that fund as well.
Got it.
One additional, if you're doing the math, and I know a lot of you are very good at math, you may wonder why we don't have more in the Pension Stabilization Fund at the end of 2024, based on the numbers that we just shared. But at the end of 2024, the board directed us to make an appropriation. We contributed $2 million to our pension fund. We basically pre-funded the amount that we would pay in 2025 plus the additional amount for a $2 million payment out of that fund in December of 2024. But after that payment, you still have $4.5 million plus in that pension fund.
I'm going to go right down the line from Commissioner Spence this way. So Commissioner Henschel.
Thank you. Dean, was this report generated from, like directly from your software? Or was this like typed out?
Well, I was a little upset with the administrator the other night. Not really, but I
love the honesty.
this is a spreadsheet, just a summary. We can run a trial balance
Okay.
that would pull all of our funds in MyGTC, but if you can imagine all the different accounts that you have in each fund,
Mhm.
it's impossible to get it on the screen that you have in front of you just because of the number of funds. And then you'd have to scroll up and down to see, the balance sheet items and then the revenue items. So you usually have to prepare some type of a summary, just so you can get your arms around it. Make it a nice, concise report that you can visualize and actually talk about.
No color.
Did you type this up yourself? Is that what I'm understanding?
I
Okay.
did.
Okay. Well, I see we have concealed postal licenses, and I don't know, if the postman.
That's a typing error.
I
It's supposed to
figured
be
as much.
postal.
But
It's actually not postal either.
I know, it's postal.
Well, I didn't even catch that when I read it.
Good catch.
I'm just wondering if we have something a little more systematized for generating such reports, that, you're not retyping things and.
Well, actually, in Workday MyGTC, I could have ran a report on fund balance, but the fund balance has 5 different components. I wasn't able to figure out how to combine the 5 different components to get a concise report, which in the software, the ERP system, I could have generated that spreadsheet directly. Just based on timing and other things that we're currently working on, this was what I wanted to do. I started with the audit report because I wanted to make sure that I was including all the funds and that I had, at least for 2023, if anybody wanted to check my numbers, they could go back to the audit report. The numbers are good. The spelling, not so good.
Okay, that was my question. If the spelling was wrong, how do you know the numbers are right?
I'm more concerned about the numbers than I am about
I can
what the
tell you that
report looks like.
I checked almost all the 2023 numbers, and they match the audit report,
All right,
so.
thank you.
We got lucky then.
I want to
No,
give you
I
a little,
think, I think you're good, and except for the one which I asked you about yesterday.
just a little context to what Mr. Ba is referring to. This is what we see when we open up MyGTC. So these are all of our funds that list, it's a scroll inside of a scroll system. So we have these new screens that are this long so we can see the entire picture right in front of us. It's just, it is somewhat challenging. And I did ask for additional information late in the day on Monday, I think, and
It was Monday.
it wasn't received as well as it could have been, but, just kidding.
We work very well together.
Mediation, something about?
I don't think
But-
that'll be necessary.
Yeah, we're great. So, finances right now is in the process of closing the books, and they've got to get that done by a certain date. And, so this was kind of thrust upon Dean at this point.
Well, the other thing that you have here, you can see Fund 103 on the Brownfield. We have all of our Brownfield funds included in our general ledger. There are probably 15 different Brownfield funds. There are 16 different drain funds that the Drain Commissioner, they're the 800 funds if you go all the way to the right. And then there are the DPW funds and a number of trust and agency funds. I didn't tally up all the funds, but there has to be 100 or more.
100, oh yeah.
The good thing is, we make sure they're all, in balance. There's, it takes a little bit of work this time of year to go through and make sure that the numbers that are in each fund, cash balances, payables, and that you have all your revenues and expenditures accounted for. Because the last thing we want is when the auditors come in, they'll be here on March 17th, for them to be looking at our funds and our transactions and finding that we don't have our books, our records where they need to be. They would propose adjustments if we don't have our records and accounting records properly accounted for, and that's just not going to happen. We make sure that the books are ready when they come in.
Mr. McAllister?
I'm good.
Mr. Flynn?
Maybe this will be all answer me after the audit comes through, but like the large discrepancies in funds where it's such different amounts from year to year, will that show up at the end of the audit and
Yeah,
be
do you
explained
have,
better?
can you give me a couple? I probably
Local
can
crimes
explain.
victim rights, just 15,000 to 50.
Okay, so that's something that's basically administered by Circuit Court.
Okay,
They closed that fund down in
Okay.
2024. We had restitution that had been collected and recorded in the fund, and the Circuit Court, I don't know the exact reason, but early in 2024, they had us distribute all of those funds to the victims. The $50 amount is something we need to clean up. We probably owe somebody that money. So that fund is done and will not be used.
okay. And most of the ones I'm seeing are like front of the court, that's the
Yeah,
largest
Frank,
difference.
I'm
and-
glad you mentioned that. We have 3 months' worth of revenue to record in the front of the court. We recorded October.
Okay.
Yesterday, it takes some time. We work with a consultant. The front of the court staff has to maintain detailed time records. We're just wrapping that up right now. So there's a significant amount of revenue that has not been recorded, which is why the fund balance is so low compared. The amounts for the funds that aren't closed are simply based on the trial balance that the administrator just shared. It's the numbers will increase. None of the fund balances are going to go lower. The fund balances for 2024, some of them will be higher when we have the books closed.
I'd like to see that after the audit's finished.
Commissioner Nelson?
All right, first of all, congratulations on, what is this, 16 years of?
19.
19 years of Accounting Excellence Awards, so.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's very good work, and we're all proud of that, so thanks for that. Enterprise fund inspections, something I always kind of keep an eye on, just because it's a large account. I think I know what it is, but I want you to explain it to me. And then also, it went up another 377,000 this year. How does money get expended out of that? So just, and I don't see anything below in the explanations.
So that's our construction code activity. That's the department under Mr. Ramey. They do all of the building inspections, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing. Their primary source of revenues would be the permits that they charge to do that work. And then obviously the primary expenditures are the employees to the staff. They have a number of contract inspectors, vehicles, just your typical types of expenditures that you would have. Primary revenue source, though, is those permits that they determine and then charge the people to, when they build a home, have to come in and do the inspections for the mechanical plumbing. But over time, based on the volume of activity in the county, there's construction everywhere. We've accumulated a pretty good fund balance.
And what are the limitations of how money can be expended out of that fund?
Well, most of the funds have a general rule that the expenditure of the funds would have to follow the purpose for which that fund. We could not grab those funds for general fund operations. You know, it's not necessarily restricted, but those funds are to provide those services. One of the issues with the accounting at the end of the year, and there's a different basis of accounting. That's full accrual accounting in that fund versus a governmental fund, which is not quite the same. But the revenues that have been recognized for permits that have been received as of 12/31/2024, all of that was recognized as revenue. But you know, all of those permits have not been closed out. So there's still some services that Bruce and his staff need to provide. They need to go back out in the field and finish up those inspections. But our auditors have never questioned that. We recognize the revenue when it's received, knowing that there's still work that needs to be done in the subsequent year.
I can add some context as well. So all the townships that have been involved with Epic GT, and we're encouraging townships to come on to use our system to make sure that they're working as effectively and efficiently as possible, as are we. We're hoping at some point in time in the future that we don't have any paper permits. We're working towards that end with our townships. So the initial startup fees that are associated with the Epic GT platform, if a township comes onto that, we have an agreement with the township that they're going to use the system, and the county pays for that system. We use those dollars to help the townships pay for that, essentially. Not all townships have availed themselves of that opportunity, but we're hoping that we get all 13 at some point. So that's the flexibility, but it's, as Dean mentioned, it has to be construction related.
In 2023, that fund paid for, they needed new trucks. You know, they had the cash and the means to cover the cost of the trucks. They pay for 100% in most cases of that Epic GT software. In some cases, they paid for some of the software that probably should have been charged to another activity. But Mr. Ramay has been very good. I apologize, I think I pronounced his name wrong the first time. But they have been very receptive of adding on townships and working with our partners to make that permit process as efficient and as online as possible. So
I shared with Commissioner Walter yesterday that we hired a consultant that is extremely talented in the world of Tyler. And Tyler is the parent company of this Epic GT platform. We don't have a good working relationship with Tyler. She does. She used to be an IT professional here at Grand Traverse County. She now works in Arizona. We've hired her to help fix that gap between the townships and the county, specifically within the Epic GT environment, so it's more friendly for them to use. you might, so when you see this balance, you may say, hey, I've heard some complaints about permits taking a period of time to approve, inspections taking some time to approve, to get through. Why are we not hiring more staff? We try. I've talked to Bruce about this several times over 24 and once this year as well. They're not there. The inspectors are just not there. So we do have concern about that, but Mr. Ramai is on it. He's watching for those candidates as they become available.
Just to clarify, in case Mr. Ramai is watching this, I'm not looking to rate his account. I knew how the money came in. I just wasn't sure what all encompassed the expenditures on that, so. Don't be nervous, Bruce.
If I could, and maybe somebody would ask, but right above that fund is the delinquent tax revolving fund, which has a significant, well over $10 million fund balance. That is the fund that the treasurer uses to purchase the delinquent taxes from our local units. That process will be happening probably early March. We have been very successful in this relationship with the townships or even the city, whereby all of the taxes aren't necessarily collected by February 14th or February 28th, but the county treasurer will purchase that uncollected tax roll and then take over the collection from that point on. This fund, any given year, we're purchasing $6 to $7 million worth of taxes that have not been paid. So the fund balance is high, but you need to have a large fund balance there so that you can purchase those taxes from all of the units and make them whole, so they're not waiting for those funds to come in. But it also takes the local units out of the foreclosure process as well.
Background in trustee, as a trustee, that is very helpful and appreciated because it helps to stabilize the township and villages' budgets.
The benefit to the county is we get a percentage over and above what the original tax bill was. It's not significant, but it is there,
1.5.
about 2%,
Sorry, 2%.
I think.
Wait. Commissioner Walter?
Comments on that? Did you have anything else?
No,
Okay.
thanks.
I have a few questions, and I apologize, I have to leave at 10:40 for an Area Agency on Aging meeting, and I'll watch the rest of it online to get the beta update if I haven't heard it already. So real quick, the Budget Stabilization Fund, when we talk about contingency, is that what that means, or is that used for something else?
The best way to explain it is just that. It is a contingency. It's to stabilize the general fund or any other fund if we have budget issues. So it's kind of a contingency on top of a contingency because you have your fund balance in your general fund
Yeah, that's
as well.
kind of what I was getting at is we have a fund balance and we've had it for a while and we have a policy that addresses that. I'm just wondering why we have it on top of it, what the extra generator is for.
So historically, we've had some challenges with our budgets, and we were required to go back to the offices and departments and say, reduce your request for the following year. This allows us to have that budget variance where we don't necessarily have to impact that, and it is ultra-conservative, Commissioner Walter, I do think that, but it is beneficial for us to know that in the event that some unforeseen circumstance comes to the county, that we would not have to go into our general fund and manage that variance in that given year, and potentially use those dollars to solve whatever issue is being presented.
So when the pavilions was having issues and we were helping to front some of that, did it come from the Budget Stabilization Fund?
It actually came from the,
No, we didn't. We basically were loaning them cash. It wasn't a budget. It was more of a balance sheet item. They didn't have cash to cover their payroll and to pay their bills. We didn't go in and outright appropriate or transfer money from our we could have done that. The board would have had to make that decision. And if the board would have went that route, you could have used these funds to say, we're going to transfer $1.2 million to you for that purpose. But no, we did not. We have not used the budget stabilization fund since it was first started.
So the increase is just interest?
No, the amount that was reported in the audit at the end of '23 should have been $1,250,000. It was
Okay. The next question, and maybe these can go together, is the CDBG, I always get that mixed up, and the Housing Trust Funds. We had a little discussion about the CDBG possibility, and we were talking about supporting Safe Harbor, but it was told that that was for something else. So the description of that fund, the description of it looks like it is kind of a pass-through to something, maybe, for rehabilitation of owner-occupied single-family residential units in the county. Is that for, like, to NMCAA, or what is that? What happens with that money?
So CDBG stands for Community Development Block Grant. Initially, we had received a number of grants from the state of Michigan to provide basically home rehabilitation services. Usually what happens, those funds from those grants were either granted to the homeowner, or if they were larger projects, there was actually a loan or a mortgage that was entered into. And so that $1.5 million fund balance that you see there is not cash. It's those loans that we have, that we account for, that have been made over time to various homeowners. One of the requirements if they sell their property, their house, they have to pay the loan off. So those loan repayments are what generates a source of revenue that we then use. It's a revolving type situation. And we do work with the
West Michigan Community Action Agency.
And those loan repayments are considered program income. And we work with the State Department. Every year I have to report what amount we have to work with, and we work with then the Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency to identify homeowners that meet their eligibility requirements. So that fund balance, even though it's large, it consists of loans that we're managing and carrying. And there's a mortgage that's filed with the Register of Deeds. And the Housing Trust Fund was created years ago primarily from foreclosure funds. We have a foreclosure fund. The proceeds from properties that we sold were at one point in time transferred back into the general fund. And the general fund, the board decided, well, let's create this housing trust fund. The primary uses of the housing trust fund, we worked with the Home Depot project over here years ago, loaned them money to build some housing units. They have repaid that amount. We're currently using the fund to loan or to make grants. To this point, we have worked exclusively with Habitat for Humanity. They'll come in, request a $50,000 grant, and then they use that also to do home improvement projects for county residents.
So is that also a revolving fund that we were?
No,
Okay.
that
With those
fund
grants,
started.
it just goes out?
Yeah,
Okay.
the fund, Housing Trust Fund at one point had about $300,000, so we are spending that down based on those grants. And Commissioner Seifert sits on the Land Bank. That's the organization that we've been working with exclusively at this point to use those funds.
They actually, Board of Commissioners, about 4 years ago, repurposed those funds and titled that fund, I believe, the Rehabilitation Trust Fund, because it was not being used. And since then, that $300,000 has gone down annually to where it is today.
I just have one more question. It's about the MIDC, the Indigent Defense Fund. Is the reason there's a higher balance that we don't have the staff to administer those services? Or can you talk about the discrepancy between those numbers from year to year?
Yes, I think the main reason for, well, I know the increase is the grants that we're receiving from the state have been increased because of the standards that have been implemented requiring that the attorneys are paid a fair hourly rate, and also they're now tracking their time, they bill for actual time. So the overall program cost has increased due to I think they have 8 standards that we've been implementing, and the last standard was the increase in the hourly rates, but also billing for full cost. The grant amount has increased over the years, and the state does provide an advance. That grant runs on the state fiscal year of October 1 to September 30th. We simply received a larger share of the state grant at the end of 2024 than we did at the end of 2023. That's my favorite fund, as Administrator Alger knows.
Of course you have a favorite fund.
It's not my favorite fund.
Dripping with sarcasm.
I know. Yeah, we did pick up on that, but
I
thank
can't,
you for
the state,
your honesty.
the state and I do not see eye to eye on that fund.
Okay.
You all set, Commissioner Walter?
That's it. Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Morris, any questions?
I'm all set, thanks.
Commissioner Andrews?
I just have a handful of questions about some of the particulars, and it's not given the amount of money. I was using the 2023 financials, which are really helpful. I can't wait for the 2024 to come out. But one question, Maple Bay development. We've heard about Maple Bay development in the process of endowing Camp Greilich. The model was Maple Bay. Look, it doesn't look like, at least in 2023, we earned any income from Maple Bay. And it was at 11,633 sort of consistently. So I guess the question is, how does that increase? And if it's not increasing, I guess this is I'm sure there's a project at Maple Bay that could,
A bathroom.
something that needs spending, just from a sort of closing of some of these funds that that don't have any activity going on year over year, and limiting from a spreadsheet that's 12, however long, 48 inches wide to maybe only 40 inches wide of accounts. So Maple Bay struck me, the county law library, which I remember, which now we have a proposal to turn into judges' chambers on the
Fourth
top
floor.
Yeah, the
the
fourth
attic,
floor.
yeah.
It hasn't changed. It doesn't look like, if only those, and I guess those are questions, and they're also like, should we talk about closing them out?
Absolutely. So we did close out the Special Projects Fund, which you'll see up at the top. It had $18,323 in it. The source of those funds over time were primarily from the county general fund. We used those dollars this year to purchase, in part, ball field fencing at the Civic Center. Maple Bay Development, Mitchell Creek, those funds have been sitting in those funds for a long time. We don't accrue any interest on those, but yes, we should look at ways to use those funds and make these small funds go away.
Yeah. Is that something that you could, you're going to go through an auditing process. You're going to see some funds that haven't seen any activity for another year. Is that something you might flag in the process for us to consider?
We can do that. Well, the auditors won't make those recommendations.
Yeah, they don't care what you
Mitchell
do.
Creek, it is a little bit challenging because those were funds that were probably left over from a state or a federal grant.
Right.
And those really should be used for that watershed in some capacity.
Well, there's.
Maple Bay, those are pretty much unrestricted funds that could be used for a project there. Gravel, if the roads need gravel.
Maybe Mr. Chase can bring an idea to us.
Well, we worked with Mr. Chase on this special project to spend that fund down.
Given that Mitchell Creek is now an impaired water, the second impaired water in our community, it seems like there's undoubtedly something that somebody could do with 8,000 in terms of septic tracking or microbial source tracking or anything like that to identify what the cause of that E. coli contamination is. I'm sure somebody could put that to use. But I guess my big picture, and then like the corrections, corrections PA 115 and corrections officer training, it didn't look like there was spending at the level of funding that's available. Are those things that we can use to offer additional? I mean, we've got crisis intervention training that we'd love to see more road patrol go through. Are there things that we could use some of these funds for, I guess is my question, to the extent they're sitting year after year?
So in summation, you're looking for Mr. Bott to say, hey, these funds are inactive, we're not making any interest, these are the ways we can get rid of these funds and spend the dollars as a, summation.
I don't know that he should tell us how we should spend them. I think that's our job to figure out how to spend them, but at least saying these are the restrictions. Do we want to put it out to the process that Commissioners Nelson, Flynn, and Walter are going through? Do we want to put them out for requests? Some of them, maybe we do just want to offer them. But yes, I think identifying which ones maybe could be
Eliminated,
Right.
spent, and how
Well,
we can or cannot
in
spend it.
response to the 2 training funds, those have generally increased a little bit over time, and you're absolutely right. We should talk to the sheriff about utilizing those funds more fully or completely. They're there for a purpose, and we should be using them to the extent that we can, and more than we have been.
Because probably there's training built into his other fund.
Right.
So maybe there's some way we could
Oh,
move
I'm
it
sure
in.
he's got it, I'm sure he has an idea.
Well,
So,
we
is
may,
that,
we may have an idea.
I guarantee you I have one. So, does that include the TNT grant, as I see that that's static, is that no longer funded by the federal government?
No, that grant has been pretty consistent at about 130 to 140,000 a year. And the no change in fund balance is simply because they generally try to use and spend 100% of that grant, so.
Gotcha. Any more questions?
Very helpful,
Mr.
thank you.
Bott? Thank you, Mr. Bott. Let's take a 5-minute break, everybody.
Bye, Ashley.
Bye. See you later. Meeting. Not looking good. This whole funding situation is gonna.
Doug had to give us 5 bullets.
Hopefully you pissed her off enough that she wants you more than she's looking for me.
How you doing, Lloyd?
Oh, maybe he did.
Yeah, he's gonna do a lot of nice stuff in there, I think. Nice guy, he's a nice
All right, in about 1 minute, hopefully our commissioners will be back and we'll get started and wrap this up for the day. Thank you for your
two left.
patience, everyone. I'm sorry?
Two left, like they're gone. They,
Oh,
Oh, so I guess we're waiting for Commissioner
Well,
McAllister.
Ryan's out, he's taking a phone call, but yeah.
You sit at my place. You are the exalted ruler, aren't you? Wow, I disagree there. All right, well, and seeing that's a study session, we're gonna go back and, there he is. Good job. We're gonna be back in session.
so I added an item to the agenda, which was a beta update. When we had a study session in January, and there was a spreadsheet that had the update on all of the litigation, one of the items on there was an upcoming trial in the beta lawsuit, which is scheduled to begin next week, and also a settlement conference. And at our last meeting, we discussed in closed session a settlement conference. That settlement conference happened last week, and then an interesting thing happened after the settlement conference, which is that the judge came out and went on the record. And I think this is information that the board will be interested to hear as a whole, so I just wanted to give you an update since it's public and we don't have to go into closed session because this happened on the record. The Judge Hamlin came out and basically made note of the fact that in this litigation, which is unusual, in my term unusual, he just pointed out that this is, one tax-paying entity against another tax-paying entity in our community, and while it's unfortunate, it's clear that the settlement conference was unsuccessful in that we didn't resolve it through a settlement, so the case is going to move forward. With the trial coming up so quickly, there was not enough time for Beta, who would like to file a motion for reconsideration. This is all public. The Judge Hamlin rejected part of their proposed exhibits for trial and their attempt to call our attorney as a witness in the trial. That was rejected because it was outside the scope of what the issues were for trial. Beta has indicated that they'd like to get the judge to revisit that decision, and if he won't revisit it, then to take an appeal to the Court of Appeals on that decision. Because the case was going so quickly to trial, they wouldn't have a chance, other than through an emergency process, to get the judge to re-evaluate his decision or let them take that appeal. So he moved the trial date back in order to give Beta the opportunity to both go and ask him to revisit his decision, which he said quite clearly that, the decision he relied on the first time, which he cited the UAW case, was quite clear and that he didn't think he got it wrong, but he, of course, would let them try to show otherwise, and then they would then be able to take an appeal to the Court of Appeals on the decision as to what the evidence should be at trial. So given that, it looks like the case is getting bigger, not smaller, or longer, not shorter, in the near term. And Administrator or Chair, you were both present. If I've misstated anything, I just think this is something that our board would be interested to understand where that case is going.
Correctly stated. I want to add emphasis to what Commissioner Andrews just said. Judge Hamlin said 2 times on 2 occasions, he said, I made the decision based on research of there's a specific case law. I think I'm right, but I'm going to allow this interlocutory appeal process, but I think I'm right. So pretty strong sentiment from Judge Hamlin. And we left that meeting. I did take the opportunity to email our attorney and say we need to have discussion about next steps soon. And I think the next step would be request for summary.
One of the other things that Judge Hamlin also said that I think was lost, not on this end, of course, was that he would, but Commissioner Andrews made comment of it, was about how it's taxpayer dollars against taxpayer dollars, and both those taxpayer dollars are out of the same pot. So he was showing that he was on the side of the taxpayer more than anybody. But again, he was, to reiterate, he was pretty adamant that he was accurate in all of his judgments, and there's not much point in having a trial, unless, because that they're gonna appeal later on about what he didn't allow. So it'll be interesting as we go forward, but we've already discussed that. Go ahead.
It's very unusual in my history with settlement conference. Very unusual that a judge comes on the record.
I took that to mean, he should be paying attention to what I'm saying, or implying. So, any comments from the crowd? Bruce? It is, unless anybody's got something to add to beta, which I didn't think so.
Yes, Bruce Moore I live in East Bay Township in District 5 in Commissioner Henschel's district. With respect to the ethics policy, I'm not a fan of an appointed permanent body. In a large county, I think that would make a lot of sense, where there's a lot of volume. But I don't think that this county is large enough that the volume is going to justify a permanent, a standing committee. And there's also already difficulty in getting volunteers to interview for existing board appointments. So I don't think that's a good direction to go. With respect to the penalty of censure, there seems to be some sentiment to try and get away from that because it doesn't really do anything, and that's wrong. There are 2 points to including the censure penalty in this. One is an admonishment to, in this case, the county commissioner, that they did something wrong. The other, and the voters will hold the person accountable for that. The other is to hold the commissioners accountable for what behaviors they're going to let slide.
Interesting.
Case in point, when this, in 2019, one of the first orders of business of the county commission was to reverse some library appointments that were viewed as a conflict of interest by the prior commission. You just discussed a litigation with Beta that is exactly the same kind of situation where a county commissioner was appointed to a citizen slot, and that county commissioner voted in the deciding vote on his own appointment. That strikes me as a very clear conflict of interest, and that has resulted in expensive litigation that is being paid for by taxpayers. Including the penalty of censure is an important thing in this ethics policy because it holds both the commissioner accountable for actions, but it holds the other commissioners accountable for letting things slide and getting into expensive litigation. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Lloyd?
Lloyd Morris, Long Lake Township. I would like to offer my services free of charge to the county and to start operating a Department of Government Efficiency. And my first act would be to require everyone in this room to send me an email of what you've accomplished since February 1st. Thank you.
To be clear, should I send you my wife's email? Nothing else? Nate?
So one thing that Dean and I have been talking about is what's this budget process going to look like? So we've hit 2 of the main key points for the underpinnings of our budget, but last year's process was certainly not a good process, and we want to make sure that we are meeting the expectations of the commissioners about what process they would like to see. So please let us know if you have ideas, if you have wants, like we need to do this thing, please tell us as soon as you can so we can start creating that process around what you want and what you need.
Any last comments, anyone? No? Fantastic. Well, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Lloyd, do you take Excel sheets